Good morning and welcome to the first forum of 2021. I'm Martha Bremer, the Director of Fuse and Leadership Duluth at the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank our sponsor of the 2021 forum series, the Duluth News Tribune, for their support. I'd also like to show great appreciation to Elena Fauché of CareerForce and the Workforce Board for inviting the Chamber to co-host and for creating this critically important offering. And finally, I'm thrilled and thankful to our nearly 250 attendees for bringing your organization to the table to gain knowledge on creating an inclusive and diverse workplace. And with that, I'll welcome Elena.
Awesome. Thank you, Martha. Welcome, everyone. I know folks are trickling in. We've got over 100 participants so far, with more joining every second. So hopefully everyone is able to get connected okay. But thank you for joining us today. I'm Elena Fauché. I'm the Director of Workforce Development for the City of Duluth. I want to start off by thanking the Duluth Chamber for co-sponsoring this event today. And also I want to thank the members of the Duluth Workforce Development Board's Equity Committee, who've been working hard for months to put this event and the toolkit together. So thank you to all of you. You should see several of the members of the Equity Committee on your screen who are going to be helping with the logistics of this event. So first, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to do some live polling during the event. So you should be able to see up on your screen the instructions for joining the live poll. You can do it one of two ways. You can either text Elena F780 to 22333, or you can log on to the web link shown and connect that way. So either way works. Texting is super easy if you're able to do that. And we're going to have polling questions throughout the event. This session will be recorded. After the event, you all will receive an email with the PDF of the toolkit, as well as a follow-up survey and the link to the recording. If you have questions during the event, we did capture some questions before the event and we'll be addressing those in the conversation. But if you have questions or comments during the event, you're welcome to add them. There should be a Q&A box that you should see on your screen, so you can add your questions there, and we have folks monitoring those, and we'll share questions anonymously throughout the event. So thanks, everyone. Sumer, let's transfer over to our first three polling questions. We're going to test out to make sure the poll works. So here's the instructions. Start off first by testing. You're just going to respond yes or no, whether you're able to connect to the poll. So we'll just give you 1 second to connect and respond. Okay, great. Excellent. So it looks like folks are connecting. We'll give it 1 more second. Okay. Samara, you want to go to the next question? So this question, what industry or sector are you in 1 word? So just enter by text or into the web link. In 1 word, what industry or sector are you in? And so this is a word cloud. So the larger the word is, the more people that have responded with that same word. So you can see we've got a huge variety represented. Lots of varieties of government, nonprofit, healthcare, education, manufacturing, transportation, construction. So thank you all for joining us. Super exciting that so many industries are represented today. All right, I'll give it 1 more second, and then you want to go to the next question? All right, so the last question, how many employees are in your company or organization? So you'll respond with 1 letter, A, B, C, D, or E. So it looks like we have companies and organizations of all sizes here, from small businesses to much larger companies and corporations. So that's great. Excellent. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Samara. You want to switch us back to the PowerPoint now? And move to our next slide. So we're joined today by a wide range of individuals representing businesses and organizations of all sizes and types from around Northeast Minnesota and some from elsewhere in the state. We're all here because we understand that it's time to take action. Many of us have taken initial steps to recruit and hire more diversity, but it's never been more clear that we need to do more. Existing disparities in our region have gotten worse in the pandemic. There's significant differences by race in educational attainment, income, and employment. And at the same time, there's a huge opportunity in front of us. In Duluth, almost a quarter of our K-12 students are students of color, compared to about 10% of the population overall. In Northeast Minnesota, that number is 17%. So that means our future workforce is the most diverse it has ever been, and we need to be ready. We had a workforce shortage in our region before the pandemic, and this will continue to be a challenge as we turn toward economic recovery. We're already seeing that employers are having a hard time hiring for some positions. We have available workers here, but many, especially people of color, aren't given a chance. Colleges in our area attract a student body that's incredibly diverse, but these students won't choose to stay after they graduate if they don't feel welcome. The business community plays a really important role in creating a welcoming community that'll attract, hire, and retain skilled workers from diverse backgrounds. So to talk a little bit more about this role and why diversity matters, I am thrilled to introduce Ms. Tawana Black, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Economic Inclusion. Ms. Black is a nationally recognized thought leader known for influencing, inspiring, and equipping cross-sector leaders to transform a personal conviction for equality into actions that produce equitable and thriving communities. In 2017, Ms. Black launched the Center for Economic Inclusion, the nation's first organization dedicated exclusively to creating inclusive regional economies by equipping public and private sector employers to dismantle institutional racism and build shared accountability for inclusive economic growth. The Center for Economic Inclusion helps move businesses and local governments from diversity and inclusion programs to triple bottom line results that are good for employees, employers, and communities. Ms. Black will be interviewed by Carl Crawford, Human Rights Officer for the City of Duluth. Mr. Crawford is a local leader and advocate for equity and inclusion, a member of the Workforce Board's Equity Committee, and working hard to ensure that our city is accessible to all people without discrimination. So Mr. Crawford, Ms. Black, thank you so much for being here today, and I will hand it over to you.
Well, good morning, Chamber friends. I'm so excited to have Ms. Black along with us. Tawana, thank you for making time to be with us this morning. And my first question for you is, given the backdrop of yesterday's historic event of having the first woman vice president, how is this going to impact your work and obviously your world?
Well, first, thank you so much, Carl, for that introduction and for the welcome to be able to join you all here in Duluth, such it is through this virtual environment. And congratulations to you all for launching this not only initiative, but the deep work to be able to partner with and equip employers with this toolkit and so many resources to be able to grow the economy in Duluth through centering racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm really excited for this conversation and for the great work that you all are doing. To your question, you know, I am really encouraged by not only what we saw take place over the last several weeks with the election of President Biden and our country moving to the place, as I noted with my own children yesterday, having a daughter who is African-American and 9 years old, and being able to say to her that the day before yesterday was the last day that our country will be able to say that we've never had a woman for vice president. It's the last day that we'll be able to say that we've never had an Asian woman or an African-American woman for president. We now have all of those things, or for vice president, we now have all of those things. And more than that, that we made that choice, right? That we often talk in our work about that we have a choice to have a racially inclusive economy or not to, that we have a choice to be able to say that we really believe in ideals of opportunity and inclusion and equity, or to act on those ideals and beliefs. And so I think now there are all kinds of young girls and young women all across our country and the globe who see us living up to those ideals and beliefs. And no matter where your politics lie, now we are where we are. And we have an opportunity to start charting a deeper course. I don't see it as only a new course, because I think it's a continuation of America's long, long history of continuing to say, how do we take just that next set of steps and go even deeper? And as it relates to our work here at the Center for Economic Inclusion, we have a lot of work to do in our state, one that is struggling economically. We've all experienced impacts of COVID-19 on our economy, on workers, on businesses that have had to close and navigate and open and shift and navigate. As an employer, I know that my employees have been impacted dramatically in their families in all kinds of ways, not just work, but the mental health of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And so I think now we not only think about the economic opportunities of the person or persons who are in office, but also what policies do we now see enacted? How quickly can we move to take even more dramatic, inclusive economic actions and policies that put more people to work in family-sustaining jobs, that make sure all small and mid-sized businesses can grow and thrive in this environment? And that in Minnesota, all of our communities have a chance to expand. In particular, I think that small and mid-sized businesses, we know those are the backbone of our economy. And if they're doing well, we're all doing well. But we've got a lot of work to do from a policy perspective to make sure that they're doing well. And we want as many dollars flowing to Minnesota and then being redeployed out to our cities and towns and communities as possible, but with a targeted lens toward racial equity.
Excellent. Thank you, Tawana. I'm so glad that you used the word choice. One of the biggest challenges I see in addressing and changing white supremacy culture within our workplace and community. Any advice or insight as to fixing this from an individual organizational level or from a community level that would be helpful?
Yeah, you started off with one of the hard ones. You know, that framing in and of itself, white supremacy culture, to take that on, and I appreciate you framing that question in terms of how do we take it on both at the community level and inside institutions, our employers, how do we take it on inside our own organizations? It requires making sure that we all even understand the word. And while I would say in my own work, in my practice, my private practice, my work at the center, I've seen an increase of use of the word, but I wouldn't necessarily say that we can assume everyone knows what the word and framing means. And so I think we have to start there to say, how do we start to break that down such that we really understand what does it mean when we describe that word, that it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in our organization is a white supremacist, right? That's a strong term, and it's one that we often say, wait a minute, that's not who I am. And yet it does mean that we're saying our institutions, our entities, our organizations, our policies have been built over a number of generations to center white people, often starting with white males and then moving to white females. And that if we want to have businesses, organizations, government structures that are inclusive, that have inclusive results, that means we have to first acknowledge, okay, wait a minute, what is it about those policies that were designed around one set of people, white people? How do we take that on? How do we start to understand that and do so in a way that fosters inclusion? How do we have those conversations? How do we create space for that? And that's often a process that takes time. It takes intentionality. It takes time in a space where the issues we're facing, issues of racial exclusion, issues of unemployment, issues of business undercapitalization are urgent issues. And so you have these two competing goals, and yet it's worth it. It's worth it to talk about power and where power has been held and centralized. It's worth it to talk about capital and dollars, to talk about wealth and wealth extraction, to talk about notions of mediocrity versus how we reward things and power in our systems. And then start to think about what are those unspoken rules and spoken and written down rules that are centered in white supremacy culture and how we can undo those. And in our work, we believe we undo those by focusing on becoming anti-racist. By each leader who says, I believe in racial equality, I believe in inclusion, racial equity, saying, okay, then I recognize this isn't about me simply not being racist. This requires me being anti-racist, me waking up every day and saying, what actions am I going to take today that drive anti-racist results? That I've got to be just as intentional about that action as an addict who's in recovery would be in waking up and saying, what am I going to do today to make sure that when I go to sleep tonight, I'm still in recovery? How am I going to be hyperactive in that work? That means having a lens toward understanding what are those things I've been taught that maybe are not true? What are those things that I've been taught are just the right way? Who said they're the right way? Who said that's the way it has to be? Because it fits my culture, it fits my ideals. But maybe it's not, just as the same way as a parallel for people who may still be puzzling in their head. There are ways that I was taught to cook macaroni and cheese. I think it's just the way you cook macaroni and cheese. Somebody else might show up at my house and say, what? You put it in the oven? Mm-hmm. You put eggs in it? What? How do you know that's the way? The only way. White supremacy culture is often the same way. There are things that you've been taught are just the way. Someone else shows up from a different race group, racial or ethnic background, and we see that as different. They communicate differently. They problem solve differently. They solve for conflict differently. And we see that as wrong instead of other. We've got to move to this place of anti-racism that starts to see that as other, but not wrong, not less than.
Excellent. So one challenge that we face in Duluth and Northeast Minnesota is the retention of a diverse or Black, Indigenous, people of color workforce, including those in both professional positions and in startup positions. What suggestions do you have for addressing this concern?
No, it's one that we find exists in every community. I'm from a small town in Kansas, a town of 12,000 people. I've lived in cities across the Midwest that range in size from very small to as large as here now living in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we find that this retention issue is one that has been consistent in communities across the country. And while sometimes the reasons are different, we're finding that now in communities that we're working with, whether it's here in St. Paul or it's in St. Cloud or Duluth or cities across the country like New Haven, Connecticut or San Diego, often we all want the same things, not only an economic opportunity and a place where we can thrive, a place where we go to work and can earn a living that sustains our family and allows us to thrive, a neighborhood where we feel welcome and included, places where our children can thrive in schools, you know, those basic fundamentals of life. But more than that, more and more, when we talk to our Asian and our Latinx, our African-American, our Indigenous families, people are making choices about where they live, where they're willing to make changes and sacrifices, make trades about their employment opportunities with a few other factors in mind. Considering not only where can I get a good job, where my skills and talents allow me to compete, but also where can the community fully embrace me? And we're finding that maybe even 10 years ago, professionals were making those decisions thinking about themselves. And you read a lot of reports about, okay, professional attraction, and companies could make that investment in the professional scene, if you will. Now we're seeing, though, people thinking a couple generations out and looking and saying, okay, yes, maybe this community has done some work to make it good for me and my career. And I can look out 5 years and see that I'm going to be able to, you know, see my career grow. And maybe the community has done some work so that there's a social scene that's a little more diverse and inclusive than it was 5 or 10 years ago. So maybe I'm interested. But if my children don't feel as included, or maybe they don't see as many opportunities for themselves. The school is having some challenges around race and inclusivity, and business leaders are disconnected from those issues. If scores around performance, academic opportunity are not changing year after year, generation after generation, and we start to see that narrative repeated over and over, you're seeing professionals of color start to say, wait a minute, I'm making some decisions here and trade-offs that just don't add up. So to that question about what can employers do, I think our line of sight has to pivot from only being about the here and now and what we do, thinking about the employees we have and how we compete for them, to recognizing it's about the whole community, not unlike the ways, again, we thought about it for the majority community, to recognizing there are decisions that your professionals of color, your talent of color at all ends of the spectrums from a socioeconomic perspective are thinking about. And they're making decisions and trade-offs, thinking about the next generation as well, to say that, wait a minute, I've had to sacrifice some things here that may not be in the best interest of my children, knowing that the data suggests that this next generation we're raising right now may be the first that won't do better than their parents economically. With all of the opportunity we have, with all the technology and all the gadgets, everything we have, the data suggests they may not do better than their parents economically. And I don't know about you, but that scares me because I'm working really hard, giving them a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And to think that it may not pay off says, okay, wait a minute, then might I be better off in some small town where I have more time, more opportunity to influence the civic comments in a place like Duluth? Could I have more opportunity to change things? And so I think communities like yours have that opportunity to say, how do we come together and really foster inclusion, really make sure that those fundamental values show up every place in everything that we do, and not look at it in ways that often when I come to communities of the size of a Duluth or other communities your size might look and say, well, how can we compete? I think you're in the best position to compete from an inclusion and diversity perspective, because so many larger cities are wrestling with these issues in ways that you just can't put your fingers on fast enough. And communities of color are saying, I want to be sure my next generation can really feel included and is set up for the best opportunity in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tawana. And we know that, Elena touched upon in the beginning, retention. We have amazing colleges here. We each year lose our best and brightest young BIPOC graduates. How important is it that our business understand the relationship they have with community and creating a safe community?
Absolutely. It's significant. It's very important that those students who are matriculating through your colleges right now, not only that you know them, that they know you, that they understand what real opportunities you have available, but also that you understand what talent they bring, not only the credential, but who are they? How do they show up in the world? When I say the world, I really mean the world. Often we have students who are in our colleges, in our universities, who bring a worldview that is far beyond what we may see or comprehend on the surface, that is going to allow our businesses to compete in the global economy. And if we see them simply as on the surface as, okay, there's another person of color, there's something on the standard. And unfortunately, we have seen, and the data supports this, if you were to go on our website and look at indicators, you'll see our indicators for an inclusive regional economy. We've tended to marginalize those students who are graduating with the same degrees as their white peers. We are not seeing them placed in those significant earning roles inside our employers across the state at the parallel rates that we should expect them to. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is they're often offered internships, additional graduate internships and things like that, instead of being offered a true permanent full-time role upon graduation with a 4-year degree. And as their peers who are sophomores and juniors see that, you talk to your friends who are seniors, you say, okay, wait a minute, should I start making plans to go to the next state? If I'm not from here, should I start making plans to go back home when I graduate? as opposed to seeing the jewel of living in Minnesota, a place that you've already become attached to over your 2 to 4 years here. We have a real opportunity to change that and build relationships through internships, through externships while our students are matriculating through college to ensure that they are attached to the economy here in our state and they're adding value that we have here. But that requires us not thinking about our diversity as something to mitigate, but seeing it as the asset that it is for our employers and our businesses to be able to compete in this economy.
Absolutely. So what are some concrete examples of things that employers or their HR department staff can do to eliminate barriers to hiring these amazing people, our amazing students?
Absolutely. I'd say the first is making sure that it is not only the job of HR to be out building those relationships and cultivating them early. One of the first steps you can take is to identify, most employers know this, where's your growth going to occur over the next year? We're in January, so we're at a good point to be charting that course and understanding what roles are we going to add over the next 12 months and what departments, and how do we then go about making sure that a broad swath of the community is fully aware of that. And then that those hiring managers are the face of your organization out in a number of communities. There are what we'd call affinity groups in most racial and ethnic groups, whether those are Black affinity organizations in accounting, or Latinx or Asian or Indigenous organizations for whether it's accounting or it is chemical engineering or other forms of engineering. There are affinity groups for just about every discipline you could think of within each racial and ethnic group. And so that means that both professionals who are very experienced and students are meeting on a monthly basis to build relationships and network within those groups. So just about anything you might need to hire for, there are groups of different racial and ethnic groups all over the state meeting on a regular basis, waiting for you to tap into them. You can reach them through LinkedIn, you can reach them through their meeting groups in order to be able to not only recruit, but also when it comes to being able to then draw retention. When you have barriers, being able to reach out and say, hey, we're running into a challenge. Is this something that you can help us examine? So if you're a mid-size or small employer, you might say, hey, I don't have a big HR department. I don't have a big D&I department or one at all, but I know that I'm facing a challenge with this particular segment of the population. I'm seeing more turnover here than I am with this department. Being able to just ask that question, what's happening? Why are you leaving? Mm-hmm. Often we find that with a little bit of questioning, we can get laser-like answers that might be about some of the burdens in the community, whether that is if we've got social challenges like transportation costs, housing costs, childcare costs. Those are often related back to some policies within the employer, which may be related to things like how frequently are we having overtime that's required if it's in a plant or an assembly environment, or what's the notice period for those things? Are benefits provided immediately, or are benefits having to be waited for 90 days or 6 months? And how might we start to mitigate for those things in departments where we have a higher concentration of communities of color? The more precision we can apply to being able to get intel about why there are retention challenges or recruitment challenges, and then going directly to the populations that you need to be able to attract in or retain, the faster you can get to solutions and then scale those solutions over time for long-term sustainability. I think one of the most interesting things we find here is that often we're having conversations with each other, but not across populations, not with the folks who we need to recruit or we need to retain. Even sometimes inside our organizations, the employee base that we need to hear from are right there, but we've been a bit hesitant to ask them, hey, what is it that you'd need in order to be able to stay longer? Or we're seeing high turnover, or what would you do? What would it take to get you to refer more people to come into the business? Mm-hmm. And we can come in and partner with employers to help them be able to get to the root of those issues.
Excellent. One of the challenges we often talk about is when you see an opportunity for a person of color to enter into an organization is typically only at the entry level. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of having diversity throughout your organization, and probably most importantly, the differences we're faced with wage and wage difference.
Absolutely. That's so important. One of the quotes I was reminded of yesterday when I saw a picture of a group of students who looked like they were probably first graders, and they were all dressed up in green with their pearls on, as many of you I'm sure saw in the media throughout the news that there are two African-American women's organizations, one African-American women's sorority, the other the Links Incorporated, of which I'm a member, that are known for wearing pearls. And our vice president is a member of both of those organizations. And so many women across the country said, I'm gonna wear my pearls, I'm gonna wear my Chuck Taylors. And to see these little young girls who looked like they were between the ages of 4 to 6, who all had on green dresses and their pearls, was just beautiful. And I was reminded of a mission from the 100 Black Men of America: what they see is what they'll be. Yes. And I've carried that with me since being president of 100 Black Women years ago in another state, because it's so true. When you see something, there's no question that that's what you're going to be. Yeah. And it doesn't leave your mind. And if I could give you a different example, we've worked with Xcel Energy here in Minnesota, and they came to us several years ago and said, we need more line workers. And there's a specific job we need, but the training is about a year long. Mm-hmm. And most people, we don't like for people to work while they get the training. And we're struggling to get people of color to do the job and get the training, because who can afford to not work? And so I said, well, who does this job? And they said, well, typically it's been white men whose grandparents were linemen, their fathers were linemen, and they were raised to know this is what you're going to do. So you know you're going to stay at home after you graduate, and you're just going to go to this program, and it's just something you know. The same is true then if we take the parallel to think about how you attract people of color into your corporation or your business, into those executive positions, or into mid-level or frontline positions. When you're being recruited into a company or an organization and you say, okay, wait a minute, let me go to the website, let me look at those pictures. Oh, there's no one who looks like me.
Yes.
But you're telling me you're excited to get me. Well, what part of me exactly?
Right.
Because so often we say we want diversity, and the moment that diversity shows up, we say, hold on, we don't do like that. We don't talk like that. We don't present like that. We don't walk like that. Don't stop that. Don't write the email like that. Don't problem solve like that. And I call it the Stepford Wives syndrome when I teach classes. It's like, okay, hold on. Now we need you to be a Stepford wife, a Blue Cross Blue Shield Stepford wife. That's one of my former clients. Or we need you to be this, whatever your company is. That's the kind of Stepford wife we need. We need you to get in order, right? And do this. And then pretty soon the candidate is saying, well, wait a minute, I thought you liked me because of who I am and all the uniqueness I brought, but you want me to pull all that out and leave it at the door. The inclusion has to be just as important as the diversity, and people are looking to be able to see that. So it's important that we attract diversity, not only at the front lines, but all throughout the organization. And that requires often starting at the top to say, what are those leadership positions that you can attract people in? And by the way, let's not only do that in HR and PR, while those are important roles, but often those are the only roles. We get someone in the diversity position, or we get someone in the foundation position or the communications position, but we don't see that diversity in those P&L departments that are responsible for business lines. And it's important that we spread that out, because the key is here, talent is evenly distributed. There is no science to suggest that talent is not evenly distributed across all racial and ethnic groups. Opportunity is not. So it's important for us to recognize that as we take our blinders off, as we do the work of becoming anti-racist, we start to recognize, wait a minute, I just have not been taught to recognize talent in all of its forms. Mm-hmm. Now that I begin that training, I can see, oh, you're talented, you're just very different than I am. So I can now recognize it, apply that recognition, and then people will become more attracted to the organization because they see that. Retention then increases because you have supervisors who are not as challenged by difference in the organization, whether it's just difference of race or difference of style or approach, but begin to appreciate that through the inclusion training and work and creating a culture of belonging inside your business.
Tawana, we have about 3 minutes left. And in that short time, I want to ask you, what do we lose when we are not inclusive? And more importantly, what do we gain?
Absolutely. Well, the data shows that today, despite all of the effort, time, energy, and money we're all putting into this work, it's not working. That while supervisors and employers think they're creating an inclusive environment, their employees are not experiencing it. And Accenture just did a 3-year study on this that was released in April of this past year. And the data showed that if we close that perception and gap between what employers think they're doing right and what their employees are actually experiencing, if we just close that perception gap by 50% in the United States alone, it would add more than $1 trillion to the US GDP.
Wow.
So in short, what we're losing is a whole lot of money in our businesses. And because this is sponsored by a chamber, because you're working in partnership with DEED, and this is an economics conversation, and because that's what my organization does, is drives the economic business case, I'm gonna leave it just at that. We're losing money, we're leaving money on the table. It's also about our values, that we're trying to do something over and over and over again, and we haven't gotten it right. We've left the wage gap in our state. We have not moved the needle, not really 1 ounce in more than 15 years. Not because we're not trying, not because we're not good people, but because the strategies we're trying to apply have been the wrong approach. So we have to drastically pivot that approach, start to center racial equity and inclusion, center the very populations who've been excluded in order to get new approaches. And I'm confident that as a state, we can do it. I'm confident the work that you all are doing with this toolkit is the right approach that's going to begin to move the needle in new ways, not only for businesses, but also for the communities you serve.
Ms. Tawana Black, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Alina, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really, really, really great discussion. As you were talking, I noted down a number of things that you said that really resonated with me. Thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time. And now, Sumer, you want to pull up the poll? I want to kind of turn it back to the audience and ask you for a moment to just really quickly, in one or a couple of words, what are the things that resonated with you most after listening to Ms. Black and Mr. Crawford? So we'll give folks a moment to respond. But in the meantime, I did see a couple of questions that came in the chat. I will address those momentarily. All right, so I'm seeing a number of comments. It sounds like there's a lot of things that really resonated, a lot of really, a wide range of ideas that really resonated. You know, one thing that, while the answers are coming in, one thing that really stood out and resonated with me was a comment that was just made at the end about not being taught to recognize talents in all of its forms. And that's, I think, something that I try to be aware of as a manager and a supervisor. And a point that is a point of tension sometimes when companies are trying to pivot and be a little bit more inclusive is really creating space for different approaches, diverse ideas, diverse perspectives, and really fostering those different approaches. So that was one thing that stood out with me. So thank you. Carl, do you have any reactions as you see some of the responses come in?
Really amazing responses. I see that, you know, the audience obviously is digging deep and really want to address this issue and challenge. And what I took from, you know, Tawana Black's conversation was we all have a choice. We have a choice that we're either going to move toward more diversity and inclusion or a choice to stay the same. So this is incredible.
Awesome. All right, I know folks are still responding, but let's move to the next question. So just sort of a quick polling question. How would, thinking about your own company and organization, how would you evaluate where your company or organization stands on its journey towards equity and inclusion? So it looks like most everyone has done a little bit of something. Some have done a lot, but definitely some room for continued growth and development, which is great and exactly what we are trying to help with our toolkit. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. And let's go to the next question. Has your company or organization offered training on diversity, equity, implicit bias in the last year? And I think, you know, one of the things that Ms. Black said that really stands out is that and this, you know, applies to my department as well, we spend a lot of time and money on diversity training and yet have still not quite gotten it right, not moved the needle, things haven't changed. And so we need to invest in different strategies that are actually going to make a difference. And I think that's something that I have really taken to heart and I'm trying to figure out what that means. And so I think reflected here, you can see a lot of companies, a lot of organizations have invested time and energy in some kind of training on diversity and equity. Okay, last question. And this is kind of transitioning over to the toolkit. If you could improve in one area, what would it be? Recruiting, hiring, onboarding, or retention? If you could improve in one area, what would it be? Okay, so I'm seeing a pretty clear balanced competition between recruiting and retention, which I think speaks to, and hiring as well. So awesome. Well, hopefully we can help with that. So awesome. All right, so Mary, you want to switch over to the PowerPoint? So in March of 2020, the Duluth Workforce Development Board hosted an event intended to launch the next phase of work on diversity and inclusion among employers in our community. Over 100 people attended in person. This was in March, right before, in fact, a couple of weeks before the pandemic hit, and we all were able to meet in person to learn and share ideas. The plan was to use this event as a launching point for a core group of employer champions committed to moving the needle on disparities and really find some different strategies, try some different things to really move the needle in terms of both access to employment and career advancement. Like so many things, this plan was interrupted by the pandemic. But as COVID took hold, we saw that the disparities were increasing and we knew we still needed to do something. So the Workforce Development Board's Equity Committee took the ideas shared at the March event, added some other research and resources, and really crowdsourced some best practices to create the toolkit we're launching today. So what you see here is the cover of the toolkit, the Diversity and Inclusion Employer Action Guide. There's 5 sections in the toolkit. I want to walk through it just to show you what's in there and hopefully get you excited about using it. So the first 4 sections are focused on our 4 areas: recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and retention. And we really picked those out because those are the 4 pain points that a lot of employers were sharing they were struggling with. So here you can see the start of the recruiting section. In each section, we started by highlighting what's the end result we're trying to achieve, and then suggesting some metrics that you can track so that you know if you're actually making a difference. And then next slide. So then the bulk of the content needs section is focused on best practices. And we really tried to focus on specific practices or tools that you could implement to really try to move the needle, to try to improve your in those 4 areas in terms of diversity and inclusion in your company. You know, the idea is there's also tools and resources, additional research, additional things you can read. And the idea is really to offer a variety of strategies that a company based on its size and abilities can adopt based on its own hiring practices. For example, a large company with an entire human resources department is going to be able to is going to have a different process than a smaller employer where the owner of the company is also the HR department, is also the hiring department. But that said, I do want to, remind everyone of something that Ms. Black said, is that, it doesn't just fall on your human resources department. Hiring managers in all departments are the front lines and the first interaction that a lot of candidates have. And so it's important that not just human resources is involved, that representatives, hiring managers from all departments are involved in both recruiting and hiring diversity, but more importantly, really being thoughtful about onboarding and creating an inclusive environment that fosters retention. So after sharing, best practices and tools and resources in each of the 4 sections, the last section offers some systems of support, including some local champions. So these are employers who are willing to share their own experience or tools that they've used with some of the different best practices listed, as well as some additional background reading for a little bit of a deeper dive, and some consultants that are available for those of you who want to work with someone, with an expert, to really think deeply about the strategies and practices you're using. So the toolkit can be downloaded from the Duluth Workforce Development website. You can see the link here. It's in the Employer Services section. And then, like I said, we'll also send out the PDF with the follow-up email from this event. So I want to just take the last little bit of time to answer some questions with some of the tools and best practices highlighted in this toolkit, and hear from employers who want to share their own experience with some of the things that have been challenging. So we'll start with Stephanie from MnDOT. Stephanie, can you share with us a little bit your experience at MnDOT on things that you can do, that employers can do to improve retention of diverse employees in both professional and entry-level positions?
Yeah, Elena, thank you. So to want to talk a little bit about entry-level positions, and at MnDOT, a lot of our new hires do begin in entry-level maintenance positions. And one of the things that MnDOT does is we support them by providing extensive training and mentoring to help them develop necessary skills. Typically, those coming into these positions are hired as what we call transportation associates, which is intended to be a training classification. During the first year is a training period, and the employees are assisted in learning equipment operations and other skills necessary to perform roadway maintenance work. Then after that year, the expectation is that the employee has developed skills to be promoted into the transportation generalist classification, which is the one MnDOT uses for our maintenance workers. Additionally, MnDOT has implemented diversity and inclusion employee committees in each office and district. The committees develop specific goals to meet the diversity, inclusion, training, development, and support needs of their employee group. Recognizing that this work is ongoing, our District 1 Diversity and Inclusion Committee has been working continuously to create spaces, develop a knowledge capture plan for critical positions, and better outline our future goals. MnDOT also has employee resource groups that have been established to create a network for several diverse groups of MnDOT employees. The resource groups focus on being inclusive and advocating for their needs, while also educating the department on cultural issues that may not clearly be understood by everyone. Lastly, MnDOT has provided training for employees, supervisors, and managers on cultural understanding, bias in the hiring process, and maintaining a respectful and equitable work environment.
Awesome, thank you. So Emily Edison from SOAR, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share some specific ways that SOAR has worked to remove bias from job descriptions in the hiring process.
Thanks, Elena. I think it's important to point out that I'm the executive director of SOAR, and we have a total of 11 staff, so we're on the smaller side. We tend to be able to be the HR, the finance, the everything person. So we've taken the steps, and probably over the last year and a half, 2 years, to really look at our job descriptions and see what is necessary to have in the job descriptions. And I saw in the chat, an individual said, besides taking out the driver's license requirement, what are some other things? And I would say what we've done is taken not only educational experience, but if someone has relevant life experience, that to us means just as much as someone who went through a formal training of education. If you can demonstrate or if you can explain and it's transferable skills, that to us is you're eligible and you're capable of doing the position. As far as our interviewing, we have just recently changed that as well. And so we eliminate all of the names and indicators on the applications when they come through. So we don't know their name, we don't know an address of where someone might live. And we do an initial screening to say, is this person eligible? Would they be able to do the job? Do they have the skills or the education or both? And that is the initial screening. We then utilize a committee of our staff who represents diverse places within our organization, whether it's racial diversity or a position that's opposite of the hiring, so that we can get a full view and a different perspective of the client who is, or the person who is applying for the job. And we use a rubric so that we can gather that information and make decisions based on the hiring committee instead of just one person deciding. So those are some things that we've done, and I'll say we've started, and there's a lot of work to go. So I was really loved hearing Tawana and saying, you know, we all have a choice, and SOAR's made the choice, and we're in it for the long haul. So excited to be here.
That's great. Thank you. So my last question, and this kind of relates to a question that was asked in the chat about what we can do, what employers can do to make the workplace culture more welcoming of diversity, and really the importance of an ongoing investment in a focus on equity in workplace culture. So Cassie from Community Action Duluth and Claire from RSI, which is a healthcare organization, can you share some of your experience?
Certainly, I can go first. For me, what it really boils down to is flexibility as much as possible and accommodations going along with that. And I don't just mean the legally mandated accommodations that you have to make because of the ADA. I mean, challenge yourself and really question why rules exist, and do your best to think about how you can include people more in general. Right. So if you have a staff event, you know, making sure that everyone can get there, maybe it's on a bus line, and make sure that there's food that everyone can eat, those kinds of accessibility things. And then also be flexible about work time, especially now during COVID with more and more folks working from home. You know, is that an option for parents? Are employees able to get their work done and still take care of their families? And then the other thing I want to say about being flexible is be flexible with policies whenever you can. Is your dress code strict? Does it have to be strict? You know, can you loosen some of those requirements? An example that we have in our personnel manual at CAD is Community Action Duluth, is for holidays. So we have a certain number of federal holidays that we get off. However, we have a policy that allows employees to work during those federal holidays and take their holiday pay on a different day. And that helps us, you know, cover holidays that aren't recognized by our federal government, by the mainstream. And I will keep it brief. But yeah, it just really comes down to flexibility and do what you can to think about whether policies are really necessary and whether you can change them to make them more inclusive.
Thanks, Cassie. Claire, what about you?
You know, we have my organization, RSI, Residential Services, we're a large employer. So we hover really anywhere from 480 to 500 employees. And so our approach is a lot different than maybe like how Emily mentioned with SOAR, that they have a team of 11 people. We are in a very different place. And so we have a very different approach. And when we first started having conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion, and recognizing on a leadership level that we need to really have some substantial planning and policies in place, it's also this bigger beast of, we have this, workforce of, 450, 500 people, and we need to be able to reach them too. And so, we really done, and this is based on feedback that we got in those early conversations where people are just saying, I feel inequipped to have these conversations. A lot of the feedback that we were getting was that I need more training, I need more education on a really basic level. And so we look at this as kind of people telling us, I need a kindergarten approach. And so when we're saying that, the approach is really, in kindergarten, right, you learn how to learn. You learn how to be a student. You're not, it's beyond just going and learning your ABCs and learning how to tie. You're learning how to go to school. You're learning how to be educated. And so our approach has really been by just fostering conversations about topics that relate to diversity and inclusion, and really integrating that into our regular meetings. So once a week, we have a larger company-wide meeting where we're introducing topics that are both buzz topics, but also just concepts that relate to this idea, so that people can get really comfortable with talking about this. Because I think that's a big barrier for us, is that people just feel inequipped to talk about it. And so normalizing being able to talk about it on kind of different scales is really important. And then we also have a committee that's doing more focused work on really looking at how we as an employer can change our practices. But a lot of it too is just really getting people okay and comfortable with having that introspection, both as an individual and looking at it as an organization. So yeah, a lot of it really is just kind of continued, sustained conversations and introducing topics so that people can feel like it's a normal thing to talk about in a workplace. So that's kind of been our approach as a larger employer.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your perspective and your experience. That's super helpful. So I know that we're getting close to the end of our time. For those of you who were really interested in this and want further guidance and support, the Workforce Board is going to be hosting ongoing help sessions for employers. So like I said, keep your eye out for a follow-up survey sent by email after this event, and there will be a chance on that survey to put in your contact information if you want to be invited to participate in those further conversations and really have some access to technical assistance. Our final ask is that each of you commit to enacting at least some of the best practices in the toolkit, and that you share these actions with your peers. Ultimately, with collective action, we can raise the bar for all employers in our community and ultimately improve equitable outcomes. So thank you everyone for engaging in this topic and for participating and doing your part. We just have the last couple of polling questions to ask, and then we'll end. So Sumer, our first question is, are you likely to use the action guide that you learned about today? Awesome, good. Sounds like it'll be useful. And then our very last question, what's one word to describe your experience today? Great. Awesome. Thank you so much to everyone for participating. Thank you again, Carl and Tawana, for joining us and being a part of the conversation. And this is the beginning, not the end. So I'm sure we'll be in touch again. The Duluth Workforce Board is here as a resource, so please feel free to reach out. And thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.